Hi. In this lecture, I'll try to keep it short. I just want to introduce you to cranial nerves and contrast them a little bit with the spinal nerves, and then we'll just practice listing them so you can get practice also in writing them out. So remember from anatomy and physiology the spinal nerves, and the spinal nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. These are nerves that are coming out of the spinal cord. This is what we were just looking at in the last lecture, where they have left the CNS. And with spinal nerves, they are all mixed nerves, meaning that they're carrying both sensory and motor fibers. So afferent and efferent fibers are both running within the same nerve. And they're all segmental. They rise from different segments of the spinal cord, and they all exit out through these intervertebral foramina. There are dorsal and ventral rami, which we're not going to talk about anymore, but you probably remember some of that from A&P. So those are the spinal nerves. They're all part of the peripheral nervous system. Now we're into the cranial nerves, and these also are part of the PNS. So don't think that cranial nerves are part of the CNS. No, they've left the CNS and they're running around in the head region. They're just not coming out through the spinal cord. They're coming out through openings in the skull. And there are 12 pair, and they're numbered anterior to posterior, or rostral to caudal, going in front to back. They arise from the brain stem, and they exit via these cranial openings. So we could go through each one of these nerves. They're listed over on the far right in Roman numerals and the names. And you should be able to figure out the opening through which they all exited the skull. We've gone through all of them. So for example, the olfactory nerve ran through the olfactory foramina. Right? So this would be a good thing to kind of review. Maybe list the nerves and then list the opening through which they leave. So I won't write those all down, but maybe I'll abbreviate it. The olfactory foramina. The optic nerve was out through the optic canal. And then we had 3, 4, first branch of 5, and 6, all leaving through the SOF. And the facial nerve, we talked about a branch of it up at this point, leaving through the stylomastoid foramen. Stymast foramen. The vestibulocochlear, we were dealing with the internal acoustic meatus, part of the temporal bone. Acoustic M. The glossopharyngeal, 9, 10, and 11 were all going out through the jugular foramen, JF, and the hypoglossal is going out through the hypoglossal canal. You can go back and review all that if you want. We will come back to it. So, in addition to that we will be reinforcing as we go through this whole nervous system chapter on cranial nerves, some of these cranial nerves, we have 12 pair, 12 pair. 3 of them are sensory only. They only carry sensory fibers. There are no motor fibers. And those you need to remember are 1, 2, and 8. So the the olfactory, the optic, and the vestibulocochlear. So smell, sight, and hearing, balance are all sensory only. There are no motor fibers in those nerves. And some of these nerves are motor only. 3, 4, 6, those are going to the eyeball. And then we have the accessory and the hypoglossal. So those 5 are motor only. The remaining 4 are mixed. The trigeminal, the facial, and the glossopharyngeal and vagus. These are 2 of the big ones that we will be spending most of our time on once we get into them and sort of through this basic introductory material. So notice on this figure, all 12 pair are indicated, and they have arrows going either into the CNS or coming out of the CNS. So these are sensory, and coming out are motor. See if that makes sense. Olfactory was sensory only. Optic was sensory only. 3 and 4 were motor only, so there's only motor neurons, etc. Okay? So we will come back to more details later. Let's keep moving. Just another picture, different text, basically the same thing. 12 cranial nerves. Here they put the sensory fibers in blue on the path, on the illustration, and the motor fibers are in red. So there is 3, 4, and 6, again, all motor only, going to muscles of the eye, extrinsic muscles of the eye. And olfactory and optic are sensory only, so they're blue. That's the idea. And you can just kind of walk your way through that. And I have a note in a blue box. If it's motor, is it somatic motor to voluntary skeletal muscles, or is it parasympathetic motor? So when you're looking at these motor pathways, is this somatic motor, or is it smooth muscle, visceral motor? Okay, so let's move on, and I think the next slide we're just going to make a quick list just to kind of start, and I will try to keep it brief. But this is good practice, just to get a piece of scratch paper and start writing them out. So let's do it once together here. So let's do cranial nerve, and let's do number 1. And we'll put the name. And then let's do brief description. What's it doing? What's its claim to fame? So the first one is the olfactory. And it is sensory only. So we'll just put sensory. We either say sensory, motor, or both. And it is going, it's for our sense of smell. That's enough. Number 2 is the optic nerve. And it is sensory only. And it's for sight, of course. And number 3 is the oculomotor. And it is motor only. And it's going to move the eyeball. With a name like Oculomotor, it sort of gives it away. And then the trochlear, nerve, and this one is also motor only, and it's going to move the eyeball as well, so just put ditto marks. And then 5 is the trigeminal. It's the largest, and it's mixed, or let's say it's both. Let's put mixed / both. So both sensory and motor fibers in it. And let's just do the three branches. So V1 is the ophthalmic. Notice the spelling, it's OPH, so it has an off sound, like get off the phone sort of sound. Ophthalmic. And this is sensory. I'm going to put a note here to see facial dermatomes, areas of the face. There are illustrations in your book and in the slides. And then V2 was the maxillary branch. And that is sensory for all upper teeth. And I'm going to say again, see facial dermatomes. And then V3 is the mandibular branch, and it's mixed. Mandibular branch, mixed, or both, has sensory and motor. So let's say that it is carrying sensory for all the lower teeth. And let's say, and see facial dermatomes. And it's carrying motor to muscles of mastication. So what kind of motor? Would that be somatic or autonomic motor? Yeah, it'd be somatic, going to voluntary skeletal muscles. So that's 5. And then cranial nerve 6 is the abducens. And I've seen it spelled as abducens with an S or abducent with a T at the end. It doesn't really matter, I'll take either one. And this one is back to motor only and moves the eyeball. And then we have the facial, which is 7. And it is mixed, or both. It's a mixed nerve. So we have somatic motor to what? To muscles of facial expression. We have sensory fibers within the facial nerve. Sensory for taste. And this is from the anterior 2/3 of tongue. And then we have autonomic fibers also running within the facial nerve. So are these going to be sensory or motor fibers, these autonomic fibers, or both? Yeah, it's motor. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. So these are autonomic motor pathways to, let's say, salivary gland, salivary and lacrimal gland. Okay, need a new page. Let's go to number 8. Moving right along. Roman numeral 8, and this is the vestibulocochlear. And it is sensory only. And it is for hearing and balance from the inner ear. And then we have 9, which is the glossopharyngeal. And this is mixed. And it has a carry sensory for taste from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So the facial did the anterior 2/3. Glossopharyngeal does the posterior 1/3. And let's say also sensory for taste buds from posterior 1/3 tongue, and let's say from chemo and baroreceptors. In the carotid sinus. We're not going to deal with that much at all. We already did it. And let's put in here also motor to the parotid gland, parotid salivary gland. So what kind of motor are we talking about? Somatic or autonomic? Yeah, it's autonomic. Okay. And then 10 is vagus. Notice the spelling. It's not like Las Vegas. And it is mixed. Carries both. And there are somatic motor fibers. Let's say to soft palate. We'll keep it simple. We'll just say to soft palate and larynx/pharynx. And there are parasympathetic. Remember, this is the vagus nerve that we talked about last quarter. It's the wandering nerve. It wanders all over the abdomen and the thorax. It's the vagabond nerve. Parasympathetic. So that's obviously motor. Let's say to heart and internal organs. And then also visceral sensory fibers. So, get a stomach ache, those sensory nerves are traveling through the vagus nerve. Have heartburn, it's coming through the vagus nerve. When the bladder's full, it's coming through the vagus nerve. Okay. Then there is the accessory nerve. It's accessory to the vagus, I suppose. This is motor only. And this is, I should say, somatic motor only. And this is to the sternocleidomastoid, I'll abbreviate as the SCM, and the trapezius. Two easy to identify large muscles of the neck. And then we have the hypoglossal. And this is motor only. And this is to all extrinsic muscles of the tongue. Hopefully you can still list those. Okay, that's sort of a quick and dirty intro to the cranial nerves. We're going to go through them in more detail as shown in the slides, but that should give you something to practice for naming them, the Roman numerals, whether they're sensory only, motor only, mixed, and then briefly what are they doing, where are they going. So I'm going to stop there, and when we come back we're going to talk about parasympathetic pathways, parasympathetic ganglia. So see you soon. Bye.